Hi, and welcome to this installment of Frank and Mary here in Southborough. If you haven't seen this show before, my name is Art Bergeron. I'm an elder law attorney. I work at Myrick O'Connell. There are 70 of us, biggest firm outside of Boston, and as a result, everybody gets to specialize in what they really like doing, and I like doing elder law, which is why I do presentations at the senior center and stuff. This show is not about law. This show is about my friends Frank and Mary. You've seen Frank and Mary and their kids, Peter, Paul, and Mary Jr. Their goal in life is to live in their house till they die and be buried in the backyard. And if they're in Southborough, that means here. They don't want to be buried in San Diego, where their daughter moved. They don't want to be married. They don't even want to go to Marlborough. They want to stay in Southborough. So the question is, who are the people they need to know? What are the programs they need to know about if they want to stay right here? So to answer that, I needed a person who really knows a lot about Southborough, and I found Doug Peck, whom I had known for many years, and then eventually convinced him to be the co-host on this show, because he's been living in Southborough for a long time, grew up in faraway Ashland, you know, but nobody holds it against him, and he just finds these great people. And today you found another great person.
I think I have.
So who we got?
We have Nicole McGurin from the Alzheimer's Association, and we're going to talk about dementia and Alzheimer's and what the Alzheimer's Association does, because we all feel that it's a very important topic for people to know and understand and know where to get information and help should you need it.
And we were talking a little bit beforehand, and it turns out you've been at the Alzheimer's Association for like a long time.
I have. I've been at the association for 13 years in September. I'm currently the Director of Family Services, and I oversee our 24/7 helpline and care consultation services for families who are caregiving for someone living with Alzheimer's, as well as people who have Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and we want to talk about that helpline, and you also said that in your earlier life there, you also dealt with the programs dealing with folks who had some early stage issues.
Yes, my first job at the association, and actually my volunteer position before I worked there, was working with early stage support groups and families and people who were newly diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
So that too is an interest. There's a whole bunch.
It is.
Right? There's just a whole bunch.
Yeah, it is. So was there something in particular that got you interested in the Alzheimer's Association?
My whole career has been in working with seniors and home care and nursing home and assisted living settings. And in all of those jobs, I got to have the opportunity to do some volunteering with the association through doing support groups and being involved with the Walk to End Alzheimer's. And when an opportunity came to work for a mission-driven organization like the Alzheimer's Association, I jumped on it.
Oh, good.
So you've been doing it for a long, since it's really grown over that time. Then that the organization has really expanded over this last 10 years. That's a big deal. But can you just start off by talking about the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, which of course always comes up and people always get them confused, and just kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I would be happy to. That's probably the most common question in my line of work that I get.
Oh, you've heard this before too?
Yes, absolutely. So let's start with dementia. So dementia is basically a category of diseases that affect someone's cognitive functioning, usually starting with their short-term memory, but also involving their complicated thinking, their ability to make decisions, their ability to communicate, and even their mood and personality. And diseases that are dementias, they all do progress over time. There can be a lot of different causes to dementia diseases. Some of them, fortunately, are reversible. People can have those symptoms because they have a problem with their thyroid or they have a medication side effect. But there are also a host of diseases that cause those dementia symptoms that are not reversible. And Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of those dementias, particularly among people over the age of 60. And it's caused by actual physiological changes to the brain that impact how the brain is able to function.
So it's a long-term thing, or what is a long-term thing? It's caused by a whole different set of diseases.
Yep.
Alzheimer's, the biggest cause of that cluster of symptoms called dementia, right? Can you just talk first a little bit about those short-term ones, though, because I think so often. So I do nothing but elder law, so I talk with a lot of old people, right?
Yep.
Which I define myself as one. I'm turning 70 in January, so I almost couldn't remember when I was 20. So I'm very kind of familiar with the issues, and I hear those questions, and I see people that went to the hospital, and they were okay, and then all of a sudden they're getting a dementia diagnosis, And I talk to people, I say, well, it might be the drugs. It might not be this, So you just kind of talk about reversible
Sure. So there are
dementia symptoms that are really reversible.
Yeah. So there are a lot of different reasons that people can have dementia symptoms. I think among older people, commonly it's medication side effects. It could be a thyroid disorder or a vitamin deficiency that can cause those symptoms that are irreversible. And sometimes it can be caused, by, as you just mentioned, by a sudden change in someone's environment, like going to the hospital and being sick in the hospital. That can cause those symptoms too. And the reason why it's the reason why it's really great to get it out there, and I'm glad you asked that question, is that when people have those kinds of symptoms, a lot of times people just make an assumption that they're having those symptoms because someone got older, or there's nothing that they can do about those symptoms. So why bring them up? And it's really important if someone's experiencing those symptoms themselves, or if a family member's noticing it, that they ask the doctor about it to try to get to the cause of that. Because sometimes in doing that diagnosis, something that's actually treatable is uncovered. And even if what's uncovered is not treatable, like Alzheimer's disease, there are lifestyle changes that can improve someone's ability to cope with that disease. There are some medications that can help with the symptoms. And without that proper diagnosis, people just don't have an opportunity to access those.
So dementias are a disease, and is what you're saying, and there are a number of different types of them. So I'm assuming that one of the reasons you're encouraging people is to go to a doctor or to talk about it with a doctor is to get an early diagnosis. Just like if you had a rash on your skin, you want to get a diagnosis what it is, so is there medication for it? Can I, when should I start using it, etc. So getting that kind of an early diagnosis can really help you in the long term. Otherwise, like any disease, you wouldn't want to let cancer go without a diagnosis, or any kind of serious disease. But they can be serious diseases.
Absolutely.
So why do people let it go? Why do people let it go?
Well, I think that probably there's, I think two common reasons.
Because you're seeing it all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm asking you, but I'm also asking Doug, because I know from your own work, when you're dealing with folks, sometimes this will come up, and you've talked about sometimes the fact that people kind of don't want to know to some extent.
Yeah, I think that, I think there are two common reasons. I think one is that a lot of people do assume that it's part of normal aging. And for a lot of people, the onset of these symptoms is gradual. And if you spend most of your time with a spouse, they might not notice it over time because it is so slow, and just assume it's a part of normal aging. And I think the second reason that really contributes to people not seeking out a diagnosis is stigma about Alzheimer's disease. People know that if you have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, that means certain changes might need to happen, that you might need help, that you might not be able to continue driving. There's all kinds of fears that are associated with that diagnosis, and that definitely causes people to kind of hide away from the symptoms, I think.
Yeah, and I think the hide away is a good lead in as well, because people do, if you can't remember names, if you have a difficulty with some things, you're less likely to go out into the environments where you were socializing before and stay more at home, even if it is with a spouse, but the world starts to shrink a little bit.
Absolutely, and I think that's, Doug, one of the big risks to not getting a diagnosis early is that people do tend to hide away and isolate themselves because they're concerned about other people noticing the symptoms they have. And with a diagnosis, even though that can't be cured, you can learn coping mechanisms for those memory problems that people are having. You can be open about the assistance that you need. And for most people, having a diagnosis and having other people know what's going on can actually help you to be less isolated and continue to get out there.
Right, because there's a lot you can do. I mean, I've seen people with diagnoses of dementia, and I've seen them 4 or 5 years later, and they're still functioning at a fairly high level, because that's the part of the disease, though, right? It's the unpredictable nature of it, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and I think that does scare people too, the unpredictable nature of it. But I think you sharing some stories of people that you've met too, highlights that, one of the most important things I think people can do in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's to keep functioning as high as they can and to stay independent, is to continue to be active socially, to continue to exercise physically, to eat well, to take care of their other health conditions. All those things really can enable a lot of people to stay in the early stages of this disease for quite some time.
Right, so as you were saying, that as you were both were saying, that socialization piece is, staying social is really important, but what is an interesting segue for the folks that have got the diagnosis too, is that you kind of want to be knowing people who are going through this. Right. Right? But through that, you end up finding that a ton of people are going through this. Right? So many people come in, I'll talk to folks, they really believe they're the only ones. It's like, oh my God, how can this be happening to me? Because the immediate people that they're dealing with, no one has the disease. But then you get them into one of your wonderful support groups for both the folks who have got the symptoms and for their caregivers, and suddenly there's like another community. It's like a community that opens up.
And that's what I was going to ask you about. So what's a support group like? You said you help run some support groups and you start them up. So when should people go? Can you give us a sense of what it's like when you go to a support group?
Sure. So the Alzheimer's Association in Massachusetts and New Hampshire is able to provide almost 100 support groups across our state that are led by volunteers that we train and screen at the Alzheimer's Association. And these support groups are a wonderful resource for families and people living with Alzheimer's. And I urge people to check them out. But most support groups are anywhere from 5 to usually around 10 caregivers in a support group, and they tend to focus on whatever problems the people in that group are experiencing that week. And the idea for support groups really is to facilitate some conversation among caregivers to help one another. Because this disease is, I think you said it, Doug, unpredictable. And it's also it affects each person uniquely. And while it's great to talk to an expert, and we urge people to do that, you also can learn so much from other people who are in the same situation from you. And the purpose of the groups really is to enable caregivers to share those tips and strategies with each other, and also to lend some support so people know they're not alone.
Right. And unlike a lot of other diseases, the caregiver assumes a huge burden, right? I mean, particularly if the person's staying at home, which many want to do as long as possible. So they also get isolated. There's a lot that goes on there for the caregivers. So besides support groups, what other kinds of services does the association offer for caregivers?
So the Alzheimer's Association also offers a 24/7 helpline where caregivers, people with Alzheimer's, and the general public can call anytime, day or night, and speak to an expert about any question related to Alzheimer's disease, any problem that they're facing, and even just if they want to share they've had a tough day and get some support around what's going on.
By the way, parenthetically, and all of this is free, right?
Yes.
So people need to understand that you're not selling a service. I mean, you do a ton of work around fundraising, and we can talk about that at the end because you're doing some important stuff. But as a result of that, what you're doing for these folks is free.
Yes. So anything we talk about today that's for families and people living with Alzheimer's is offered at no cost to families. So again, I really urge people to check out the helpline for that sort of help, as well as in Massachusetts, you have the ability to schedule a consultation with one of our staff members at one of our offices, either in Worcester, Waltham, Rainham, or Springfield, Massachusetts, to talk to a social worker about what's going on with your individual situation and get a care plan to deal with your specific challenges.
I was going to ask you this at the beginning. I'm going to just step back a minute. But the Alzheimer's Association, there's a national association, and then I think we're pretty fortunate in Massachusetts to have the Mass and New Hampshire one. I understood it to be one of the oldest and first of the associations, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, we started out as the Massachusetts chapter, but
Okay.
we welcomed New Hampshire probably at least 8 years ago now. But the Massachusetts chapter is one of the founding chapters of the Alzheimer's Association. And there's a whole network of chapters across the entire country. So any town or city that someone lives in has the services that we're talking about available to them.
Okay, so somebody that's living in Mass, for example, they might have parents in Iowa or someplace that are dealing with it. They can call and get information or encourage their parents to call, but it doesn't make any difference.
No, it doesn't matter where you live. Yep.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah, I was going to say that's really exciting, and vice versa, because you get so many folks who grew up here and have moved away, and then Thanksgiving comes and there's that inevitable, oh my God, mine isn't quite the same, what?
Yeah.
But they have no idea about how any of the programs here work. So you're the first call.
We are usually the 24/7 helpline.
And by the way,
team
I bet that we can get that number on the right?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll get that on
Right.
at the end. And the website, because the website has a lot of good information, even some programs that are very simple in terms of sort of training programs for people to take a look at, because it's really about, you end up dealing with behaviors, and the behaviors get very different from person to person, and you need a little help to know, should I argue with this person? Should I try to, what do I do when this comes about? I bet that's a majority of the calls you get at the helpline.
Yes, I think that the majority of calls we get at the helpline are around challenging behaviors and making decisions about what's safe for somebody. I think are our top reasons.
Yeah.
But I also do, Doug, I would urge people, and I know we're going to list this at the end, to check out our website. There's a lot of really great information on there.
We can actually run this as a banner throughout the show.
There's online education programs, and for those who are tech savvy, there's the ability throughout the website now for people to live chat and get answers to their questions that way if that's how they prefer to get their information. So it's a really great source of information.
Oh, good.
So there's a chat version of the 24-hour helpline?
Yes,
You can actually
that's new, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I haven't seen it before. I've been on the website
Hot off
for a
the
while.
press.
I don't know if I could ever figure it out.
Yeah, you could.
That stuff
A little
kinda-
box
that
comes
kinda-
up.
very
and
easy.
you
That
can
stuff
do it.
kind of baffles me. So can you go back to one of the programs that you had said you're dealing with kind of early on in the Alzheimer's Association for folks who are kind of just starting to experience some of this? Can you just kind of talk about what the unique challenges of that, and what programmatically people can be doing in order to try to deal with those kind of the early stages?
Sure. So I think in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, some of the biggest challenges for people living with Alzheimer's and their families are that isolation. I think some challenges around communication and kind of organizing someone's day. Can be tough. And I think that we have a wonderful program called Taking Action, which people can find out about from our 24/7 helpline, which is a 4-part education and support series that really is intended to educate people about what does this diagnosis mean, what's going on, so that people understand that the symptoms they're experiencing are not their fault, and that there's a real cause to them. But then also learning about what are some coping strategies around those symptoms. What are some ways that you can remember important appointments? What are some ways that you can stay active? As well as learning about recommended diet changes, the importance of physical exercise, and also ways for people to get involved with the cause.
Okay.
So it's a whole variety. So just for example, so could you give people an example of regarding diet or regarding coping things, some of the things that come up in terms of strategies, things that you can do?
Sure. So some of them I think are as simple as reminding people to use a calendar. But in the case of someone who might have early Alzheimer's, to start using the calendar for just about everything. For a lot of things. You might put on your calendar things like Tuesday is trash day. Things that you might have relied on your short-term memory to remember.
So I'm feeling like I already have kind of early, right? Because don't you find yourself?
You're not that early.
No, but don't you? Oh, you're killing me. Don't you find yourself though? You're increasingly taking notes, right? Because you're just saying to yourself, why do I have to waste memory space trying to remember this thing, right?
Well,
it's a challenge.
It
Yeah.
is, it is a challenge.
But that is one other thing we urge people to do, is to start getting in the habit of taking notes. And also, you know, the more people in the beginning stages can have a routine around their daily activities, the longer they're able to do that. So I think lots of the strategies are really around, you know, how can we form habits and make tasks that we want to continue to be able to do part of our long-term memory. That's a lot stronger than your recent recall. So, you know, giving people strategies around that.
So,
That's
and what
real-
I've
that's
found
really
going to the website, although I haven't
Yeah.
been for a little while, is that although this is a very complicated disease, and dementia in general can be very complicated, the website is super friendly. It's really in language that anybody can understand, and it's really about practical things that people that are dealing with the disease can use. You know, I know you folks do a lot of research and fund for a lot of research. You can talk a little bit about that. But the website's not like that. It's not a technical, scientific website. It's really something practical that people can get a lot of answers to.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, with a disease like Alzheimer's disease, where there's not a pill that cures this disease or magically makes symptoms disappear or slows it down, unfortunately, and not yet. You know, we're working on that. But there are so many practical strategies that caregivers and people with Alzheimer's have learned throughout the years that really make a big difference in somebody's day-to-day. And that's really the purpose of the website. It's the purpose of the 24/7 helpline, our support groups, our education programs, are all around sharing that really important information with people to make their lives easier.
So is part of that also like a referral service? Because I know a lot of primary care physicians are hesitant to diagnose dementia because it can be difficult. And again, no one wants to give that kind of bad news to somebody that they've known for 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Right.
But they may call concerned that they're seeing this.
Yeah.
So can you refer them to a neurologist or other folks? There's a lot of memory care units in the area.
So people can call our 24/7 helpline or visit our website,
Okay.
whichever way they prefer, to get referrals from anywhere to memory diagnostic clinics, to elder law attorneys, to home care providers, to day programs, support groups, all range of programs and services that can help people from anywhere, starting with the diagnosis, like you mentioned, but also to, you know, finding long-term care and everything in between.
Everything in between.
Because
Yes.
I know one of the issues, even with primary care physicians, is that a lot of these folks, I agree, they're kind of afraid to make the diagnosis, and I know that a lot of these folks are being trained more.
More now, yes.
But they also, once they make the diagnosis, the question is, then what? Because
Right.
it isn't like so many of the other diseases. Here are the pills, we'll see you in 6 months. It's this whole set of adaptation programs and all of these other pieces, of which many of these doctors aren't necessarily aware, because it isn't kind of medical model treatment. You know, it's a
Right.
real challenge.
It is,
Yeah.
but again, I think we're fortunate to live in Massachusetts. First of all, we have a governor and a legislature that are really strong proponents of making people aware of it and really enacting legislation such as legislation that all doctors need to be informed about dementia and about Alzheimer's disease.
But a lot of that really has been driven by the advocacy of you guys.
It has
I think the Alzheimer's Association, I remember talking to, there was a wonderful guy named John Polanowitz, who I'd met him because he had been the CEO of our hospital before he left to work for somebody, or for Stewart, before he ended up being Secretary of Health and Human Services here. And I remember talking to him on an unrelated issue regarding a particular problem, and he said, you know what you really need to do this? He said, you really need the backing of the Alzheimer's Association. He said, the Alzheimer's Association has such credibility here, right, in the legislature and in the governor's office. If they want it, it can really has a chance of getting done. It's a real testament to what the Alzheimer's Association, I don't know about other states, but what they've done here in terms of your credibility. It's really something.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate in Massachusetts to have that support and have the leadership of our chapter, as well as the hundreds and hundreds of volunteers that do work with us on advocacy, because we can provide the structure and the training and arrange meetings around these issues. But what really gets the attention of the governor and of the legislature is hearing from families and their constituents that this is a disease that's important to them, that's impacted them. And in this state, we've had a lot of really brave families, step forward forward and use their voice. And I think that's made a real difference.
Now, I know when we were talking before the show, we talked a little bit about this evolution of this so-called dementia-friendly communities movement here. And I know Alzheimer's Association has been kind of cutting edge in terms of supporting some of those programs too. Can you just talk about that for a few minutes? About kind of what or how you imagine, what is a dementia-friendly community?
Oh.
Right.
Well,
everybody has a different, there isn't an official definition.
Right.
What to you, what is it, as a person who's seeing this stuff all the time?
Yeah. Well, I think a dementia-friendly community is somewhere where someone who has the disease of Alzheimer's, disease, feels welcome and is able to, do the simple day-to-day things that we take for granted without a lot of trouble. Knowing that they can go to a bank, and that if they're gonna have trouble finding their bank card, it's okay to ask somebody, is this the right one, and not feel embarrassed about that. I think a dementia-friendly community is somewhere where a caregiver is not concerned that if they go with their loved one to the library and need to go in with them to the bathroom, that there's a place for them to do that in a dignified manner. And I think that it's living somewhere where I think not just people with dementia, but with people with all different kinds of diagnoses that require some support and assistance, get that acceptance and are able to, again, move freely in their community and hopefully stay in this community as their disease progresses.
Yeah, and again, that's why I wanted to have somebody here to talk about that, because again, it's all about trying to stay in the community, but the community's got to be a welcoming community to that, and understand what's going on. Understand that there's going to be some different behavior, and we can make accommodations for it. Everybody's a little bit different. And I know we are, again, very fortunate in this area. I've lost track of how many memory cafes we have. I think there's probably 4 or 5 a week. A memory cafe is, again, somewhere where you go for free. It's usually around lunchtime, and you may get something to eat. They provide entertainment there, and it's for the caregiver and the person to go and enjoy themselves for an hour or so, again, with like people. And then we have
caregiver and the person who has dementia together, right?
And then we have a daybreak program in 3 towns now, and soon to be a 4th town.
I was just going to say
Marlborough, Hudson, Northborough, and soon to be Sudbury.
Right.
Where it's a 3-hour program where the caregiver can drop the person with dementia off. There's activities, there's lunch, and again, they're with people that have similar issues, and the caregiver gets a tremendous break. And again, that's free and provided by various funding resources around. So we're in a good place. Those things did not exist even just 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been really encouraging in Massachusetts to see the groundswell of support from a lot of communities. And that is so important because, every community is a little bit different. And I think at the heart of so many people's wishes is to be able to remain in that community and to see programs emerge from where they're living makes such a big difference. And it's really important that we're seeing this now because as much as Alzheimer's disease is a huge public health crisis now, with over 130,000.
Wait till we get old.
Yeah.
With over 130,000 people in Massachusetts who have Alzheimer's or another dementia, those numbers, in the next, 20, 25 years are expected to double, maybe even triple.
Right.
So, starting to put some of these structures in place and make them kind of a part of our everyday life, is important to do now, and it's going to serve us well in the future too.
And as you would kind of, when you were going through that kind of list of people who constitute a dementia-friendly community, that notion of connecting all of those people so that the person in the library knows, the person in town hall knows, the person in the bank, so that
and even fire and police departments are all well trained now again. So when they go into a house, they understand that the behavior that the person is exhibiting, and so they're not as afraid to make that call, that 911 call if it's necessary.
And I know that a lot of that training is done by them.
They are. That's another point. You do a ton of training, don't you, for this?
We do, yes. We do a lot of training around first responders. We've also involved in training medical professionals, including doctors, nurses, and social workers, as well as providing training for kind of the front line of care for people with Alzheimer's and home health aides and nursing assistants in nursing homes as well.
Oh, good.
So this was a great idea
It was
to
a good
have her
idea?
come. This
Yeah.
is terrific. This is just terrific.
She also
So-
knows it really well
So
from all different
that's-
aspects.
Yeah,
so,
well, yeah, but that's
yeah.
because we've been doing it for a long time, you know, because it's like a collection of a whole bunch of different little pieces that put together add up to really allowing a lot of people who used to really feel they just had to hide in their house to be able
Right.
to live in to
Right.
live their lives. So
There's a huge impact.
it's
on
huge.
everybody,
So
yeah.
thank you so much. We'll make sure that we'll check with the folks here at the cable station. Make sure that the banner is up, your
Yeah.
phone number is up, the the helpline, all of that jazz.
Yeah.
Thanks a
Yep.
million. Thank you.
Really appreciate
you
it.
so much
Thank
for
you
having
coming
me.
by.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks.
Yep.
Yet another great guest.
Thanks.
We'll look forward to seeing you on the next installment of Frank and Mary here in Southborough. Thank you very
Good.
much.
Thanks.